At the turn of 2024, in January, Ukraine's two largest cities, Kiev and Kharkiv, came under attack from Russian missiles. At least 130 people were injured and 5 were killed. But what set the attack apart was not the carnage itself, but the weapon of choice. Russia had employed missiles from North Korea, drones from Iran, and technology from China. It was the first such coordination of international arms. Warfare has changed significantly since then. Russia now manufactures about 330 drones per month on its own and is working with Iran to establish a new drone factory within Russia, which will further increase production. Meanwhile, North Korea is supplying Russia with rounds of artillery shells. More than 2.5 million shells have been delivered so far, just as Ukraine's stockpiles have depleted. China, for its part, has emerged as Russia's most significant economic lifeline. The Chinese have ramped up their imports of Russian oil and gas, injecting billions upon billions into the Russian economy. At the same time, China supplies Russia with a wide range of military technology, from semiconductors and electronic devices to radar and jet fighter components. It is precisely because of this combined support from China, Iran, and North Korea that Moscow has been able to circumvent Western trade sanctions and thwart attempts to isolate it on the global stage. Yet this quadrilateral support, as laid out, merely scratches the surface. Since 2022, military, economic, political, and technological ties between all four nations have deepened. Their shared objective is to establish an alternative to the existing Pax Americana, and even though all four powers have widely different values and beliefs, by joining hands, their collective power projection far exceeds the sum of their individual efforts. Together, they might just rewrite the rules of the game. Recently, Ukrainian officials published a video showing North Korean recruits in Russia getting ready to join the war. Some 11,000 North Korean soldiers are estimated to join the Russian side. That's quite a story, and some question the legitimacy of it, but its metadata is just as informative. Dozens of articles were published, but this received a surprisingly muted response from Europe, making it a potential blind spot. This data is from ground news. Seeing all sides to a conflict is vital to making proper decisions, and these tools allow me to do just that. It's why I asked them to sponsor this video. Recently, Putin hosted leaders from the Global South at the 16th BRICS Summit. Its focus is on strengthening multilateralism. Comparatively, hundreds of headlines surfaced worldwide. It's interesting that primarily government-funded sources are covering it out of Russia, Ukraine, and even China itself. Understanding these developments and others like it help make sense of the contemporary world. Subscribe through my link ground.news/Caspian or scan the QR code on the screen to save 40% off the Vantage plan. That's the one I use. Your subscription supports our work and makes this channel possible, so I recommend you check it out. The link is below. Russia is shaking the foundations of contemporary geopolitics. It is openly challenging the American global order it has been side-eyeing for decades. Reapproachment with China, Iran, and North Korea kicked into higher gear following the annexation of Crimea. Between 2013 and 2021, China's portion of Russian trade grew from 10% to 20%. Simultaneously, from 2018 to 2022, Russia supplied 83% of China's total arms imports. This technology transfer was a game changer. It helped China strengthen its air defense and air force while also improving its submarine and naval capabilities. At around the same time, Russia renewed its association with Iran and worked together to keep Syrian President al-Assad in office following the outbreak of civil war in 2011. By doing so, the Russians threw Iran a lifeline that shielded it from the effects of US sanctions. But while Russia is the driving force behind the new anti-American order, it is not the sole architect holding the pack together. Diplomatic ties are steadily becoming multilateral, deeply so. China is buying large sums of Iranian oil and is investing billions into its economy. North Korea provides Iran with sophisticated missile technology, the same technology that Iran now uses to supply its proxies. North Korea also holds close political and economic relations with China while having close military and diplomatic ties with Russia. The Ukrainian war, however, changed everything. It accelerated the diplomatic, military, and economic ties between these four nations in ways that surpass their historical ties. Cut off from Western trade, Moscow now relies on China, Iran, and North Korea for strategic supplies like ammunition, drones, and microchips. In return, these countries get to negotiate with their Russian counterparts for concessions that benefit their own economies and militaries. For instance, Russia is now Iran's largest source of foreign investment and one of its biggest arms suppliers. At the same time, Moscow has defended Iran and its proxies at the UN Security Council. This support has been invaluable. In fact, it is precisely because of this support that Iran felt confident enough to activate its proxies in and around the Middle East. At the same time, Russia is now also China's largest source of crude oil, and last year, trade between the two eclipsed $240 billion, a record high. Russia has also provided the Chinese with sophisticated weaponry, and their joint military exercises have expanded both in scale and frequency. The Russians still hold an edge over their Chinese counterparts in military equipment, including submarine technology, remote sensing satellites, and aircraft engines. If additional technology transfers take hold, it would undermine American advantages in East Asia and elsewhere. In parallel, Russia has unlocked millions of dollars in North Korean assets that were previously frozen in Russian banks in compliance with UN Security Council sanctions. As a gesture of appreciation, North Korea has supplied Russia with ammunition and other forms of military support. Relations between Moscow and Pyongyang are growing ever closer. The North Koreans are now negotiating for advanced technology transfers, which would increase the range and precision of their intercontinental ballistic missiles and upend American security in East Asia. No question about it, Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea are riding high on the wave, literally so. For 3 years in a row, they've held joint naval exercises in the Gulf of Oman and are now planning to hold such drills elsewhere. By joining forces, the four nations get to amplify their power beyond the sum of their individual effort. Anti-American sentiment is the catalyst that binds them together and fuels the creation of their so-called alternative order. Each power claims a sphere of influence of its own. China casts a net over Taiwan and the South China Sea. Iran has its proxies operating in Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and Yemen. North Korea claims the entirety of the Korean peninsula, and Russia is eyeing the post-Soviet states. Yet, in all four battle spaces, America is the main barrier that keeps them contained from their acclaimed spheres of influence. In response, all four nations seek to undermine American power projection. So, united in spite, competitors turn into collaborators. At the end of the Cold War, the United States filled the power vacuum to establish itself as the world's preeminent superpower. And so, for decades, threats to the US-led order were limited to a handful of rogue states with little power to upend it. But now, things are a little different. Collaboration between Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea has reduced the potency of Western tools of statecraft. The alternative order is actively working to downgrade its reliance on the US dollar. The share of Russia's imports invoiced in Chinese renminbi jumped from 3% in 2021 to 20% in 2022. A year later, in December 2023, Iran and Russia agreed to conduct bilateral trade using their own currencies. These steps, likely the first of many, neutralize Western sanctions and even undermine American hegemony vis-à-vis the dollar. Collaboration is also happening in the information domain. China, Iran, and North Korea did not condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine and placed the blame squarely on NATO. Similarly, none of the members of the alternative order denounced the Hamas attack on October 7th. This synchronization of the informational warfare is not coordinated at the state level, but the messaging organically overlaps to portray America as a bully and a destabilizing force, and it works particularly well in the global south. The alternative order can pursue such designs because geography permits it. Shared borders and littoral zones allow for transportation corridors that are safe from US interdiction. Iran now ships its drones to Russia through the Caspian Sea, a maritime zone shielded from the US Navy. Still more, Iran and Russia have signed a deal to construct a rail corridor meant to rival the Suez Canal. It goes from Moscow to Baku and then finally to Tehran. Meanwhile, China and Russia are working to build new transportation and energy infrastructure that run solely through their own territories. This enables the Russians to bypass sanctions on oil exports by delivering supplies to China via pipelines. China, on the other hand, gains uninterrupted access to Russia's military-industrial complex, which may prove helpful in the event of a military conflict between Beijing and Washington. Taken together, the members of the alternative order enjoy direct pathways to one another's territories. Some of the terrain in between is difficult to navigate and infrastructure costs may pile up. But in theory, Pyongyang can access Tehran by going through Chinese and Russian territory and the Caspian Sea. This geographic reality gives the alternative order an edge. On the flip side, this also means that in the event of hostilities with the alternative order, the Americans would be pitted against the collective resources and capabilities of Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. Admittedly, that's only a theory, but it's nevertheless a theory no power would want to test. Despite the fanfare, all is not fine and dandy in the alternative order. Much of the collaboration has so far been based on bilateral interests. However, as this grows into trilateral and quadrilateral policy, their shared capacity for power projection stands to expand disproportionately. Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea are in concert in their anti-American pursuits. But this shared objective wasn't always so. In fact, from a historical lens, the four have opposed one another longer than they've opposed the United States. In 1941, the Soviet Union invaded Iran and tried to employ local separatists to create puppet states. Russia also had a long-standing border dispute with China, which was only settled in 2004. Meanwhile, both China and Russia had previously supported Western efforts to restrain Iran's nuclear programs and to isolate North Korea. Even today, the four nations have major reservations about one another. For instance, China is getting Russian oil at a steep discount because the sanctions have essentially eliminated all competition to demand a market price. In Central Asia, the rivalry between Russia and China is on full display. Both are vying for influence in places like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan. Meanwhile, in Pakistan and Afghanistan, Chinese expansionism comes at the expense of Iranian influence and is detrimental to Iran's interests. Even the Russian-Iranian alliance is not what it's all made out to be. The two don't see eye to eye in the South Caucasus and the broader Middle East. And despite all the hype about their military technological cooperation, combat drones, missiles and satellites are merely bargaining chips in bilateral talks. There are no free handouts. As soon as some development happens that is detrimental to the other, the praised military technological bargaining chips are pulled back, much like a carrot and stick policy. While these reservations are unlikely to be fixed anytime soon, mutual antagonism towards America has proven even stronger, and that sentiment carries a lot of weight. Across the globe, there are plenty of countries with like-minded governments. Imagine Belarus, Serbia, Syria, Lebanon, Eritrea, Sudan, Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, and many others in the global south joining the alternative order just to spite the Americans. Even if these powers have next to nothing in common, they don't need a coherent roadmap to undo America's global order. Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea could simply pursue their own interests at a prearranged time and space. For example, they could employ provocations at the same time to spread out American resources and capacity. America, as powerful as it is, cannot be everywhere all at once. If large-scale hostilities started in Israel and Taiwan, in addition to the existing conflict in Ukraine, the Americans would have to make sacrifices and abandon some regions. That may seem irrational, but geopolitics is like that. Every nation operates in its own distinct irrational reality, but when such nations come together, they might just possess the power to tip the world off its axis. I've been your host Shirvan from Caspian Report. Thank you for your time and Sawal.